Thank you everyone for being here to this new edition of the Search and Matching Macrofinance virtual seminar series. We are very happy to have here today Joseph Victor Rios-Rull presenting Wealth, Wages, and Employment. This is still preliminary work, and I heard he's very excited to hear our opinions. So thank you for all the panelists that's joined us today for this. And just so you know, on April 13th, okay, it's also on Monday, the same time. We are going to have Sumudu Watugala from Indiana University presenting credit relationships and fragilities in hedge fund broker dealer networks. So thank you, Victor Rules, and sorry, I should have said your co-authors,
Can
self.
I show instead of us?
Hey, so thank you everyone for being here, and Victor, please take over.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. I've been working hard to try to make sense of all this. So, Per and Cesar, I think, are in the audience, and forgive me for everything. I'm not gonna say. I'm gonna say that doesn't make a lot of sense. Yin Feng, however, it's in Chinese time, and this was beyond the call of duty to stay awake. So he'll see it later. Okay, so what in macro, one of the main concerns are labor market fluctuations. That involves not working harder, but a lot of flows of workers across jobs and employment states. And of these, there are three empirical features that are important. One is that there is a lot of cyclicality in the way workers go in and out of employment, unemployment, and non-participation. And job-to-job transitions are the largest flow, and they're very procyclical. And wages of new hires are more volatile than wages of job stayers. So you want to understand these patterns, and we want to have a framework that determines jointly the mobility of workers, the wage dispersion, and household wealth. And Per's earlier work was the first treatment of this, where they were interested, as far as I can tell, is in how do workers respond to changes in job finding and job losing rates. What we want to do here is not only bring the other side, bring the general equilibrium part and how firms create, but also get a notion of wage rigidity. We're going to have a partial theory of wage determination. Partial, I mean, no, not partial, global theory of wage determination. But what we want to see is how much of that, how rigid wages are. This is a central tenet in a lot of macro work that is needed to try to make sense of the large employment volatility. So let me show a little bit of data just to start. And the first one is average wage moves less than output and is slightly procyclical. New wages or wages of new hires are more volatile and more procyclical. Unemployment is wild and obviously countercyclical. But quits, as mentioned by Jones, which are asking firms, as far as I can tell, that they are not so good at distinguishing where they're going. They're very procyclical. Layoffs are countercyclical. Separation rates, slightly countercyclical. And then we have a lot of turnover that is switches are large and procyclical. Job to job are large and procyclical. And then we have the standard properties of consumption and investment. So what we want to do is have a model that can speak about these things and see what are the features that this model will highlight that are fundamental to have these properties. Okay, there's some additional properties that I'm not going to address. So this project deals on many literatures, not only the pair and co-authors and Bob Hall's paper, but we are making, in a way, this is Ayagari meets Cohen, research in an Ayagari world. And it's like, think of this as general equilibrium, aggregate uncertainty versions of the work. Well, in more general, in many other dimensions of the work of Yannick Hout and Seb Salaria, Cloman and Shi and Ben, who's also in the audience. So there is a relation with heterogeneous agents and search. We also want to talk about the extent to which wage cyclicality and rigidity, and talk about gross flows of job to job. And we're going to use some of Bear's tricks, I wouldn't say tricks, Bear's strategy to solve for the cyclicality of complicated economies. So we want to here build a joint theory of wages, employment, and wealth. That's what those three papers I said at the beginning also do. That has the properties that agents are risk averse, and we have an Ayagari type setting with incomplete markets. Wages are competitive with endogenous quits and on the job search. But we also have out of the labor force, endogenous participation, and as we want to replicate some of the richness of the data. And as we will see, we have ways to go. My own sweet memories of my left-wing youth, but I wanted to bring capitalists to the center. And why do I want to? Who are these guys? It's the guys who hold most of the wealth, because we want to have workers who, while holding assets, are overall quite poor. And to bring that, we have another group of people who are quite passive, but make sure that the prices behave properly. And then we're going to organize the switches with extreme value shocks. And they are going to pick two sets of them. One set that determines the actions of whether to work and not search, to work and search, to quit and so search and not work, or to be outside the labor force. But also there's going to be another set of these shocks that are responsible for part of wage dispersion. So in the way to think of this is under competitive search, wealth heterogeneity is not enough to generate a lot of wealth dispersion, or wages are going to be concentrated in a very, very extremely narrow range. And in order to get slightly more action and more chances to have rationales for quitting or for additional quits during expansions or distortions, we're going to have some shocks that are capable of generating a larger wage dispersion. We'll see that in a little while. That will allow us to study wage rigidity. And the way we're going to think of this is there's a distribution of wages that are hardwired. And in some alternative economies, the wages are going to have an elasticity to aggregate TFP that allows them to respond. And think of this as WZ times Z is just the amount that the wage contract respond to current conditions with, and we're going to try to report on how this rigidity or flexibility of wages shape the business cycle properties. Think of VZ of zero means wages are very rigid within a job, while VZ being bigger than zero will show some responsiveness to aggregate conditions. And that is going to shed light on the state and higher the wage volatility gap, the job-to-job transition, and the differentials in quad cyclicality of quits versus separations. Okay. So the model ingredients, what are they? Take a basic Ayagari and make the job a choice with frictions, like it's standard in all these models. Quitting is easy. Deciding to search is easy. But being able to work is the only thing that has difficulty. It depends on the market circumstances to find a job. Now, the decisions that houses are going to make about what to do are going to be informed by wealth. So think of that. The wealthier an agent is, the more it can listen to its preference. The poorer an agent is, in general, the more important the relative price, the relative wage it is. So as I said, worker search, create or do on the job search or exit to outside the labor force. And what we want to control is how does the correlation between wages and wealth went higher and the wage dispersion goes. So as I said before, in the absence of the second set of shocks that we have, not only wage dispersion is tiny, but also there is a brutal relation, there's a correlation of one between the initial wealth and the wages held and the wages achieved. So in order to break down this correlation and reduce it, we're going to have these additional shocks. And this is the two-sided noise to get wage dispersion and turnover. We're going to think of them as aiming application shocks. It cannot be shocks to the firm you work in, because these ones will apply before you get the job. So think of it as that your circumstances will determine what's the best pair of wage and market tightness that you want to get. But you're not going to be able to get there exactly. And the reason is that there is noise in your arrival to your favorite market. And that's what we'll have. And this is from the side of the workers. But also firms are going to make the same type of mistakes. There is a pair wage and market tightness and maximize profit, but they're going to make mistakes. And that is what these shocks are going to do. It's going to prevent workers and firms for getting their favorite combination. That said, the bigger, what nice property about these shocks is that the extent of the mistake is a function of the differences in rewards. And the way of saying that is that if one alternative is a lot more rewarding than the others, then you're more likely to get it right. As the alternatives become flatter and the utility of the profits become more similar, then the precision comes down. This is an important property that we want to prevent. We think it's important to keep it in cyclical context when one of the properties of the cycle is to change the relative rewards of different outcomes, of different wages in particular. As I said, you're going to have capitalists, which are 10% of them, doesn't matter the number, but they are own most of the wealth, about 80% of it. And in practice, we're going to talk about wage dispersion by segmenting markets and only dealing with three of them. See much in detail. And think of what we have in mind as a model where, at least in the current version, a model is half a quarter, and we probably move into a monthly model in next versions. Okay, so I'm a little bit scared that nobody's asking anything. I'm not used to this. But, so please feel free to to interrupt. So I'm done with the intro. If that's it, I'm gonna get into a few slides of the problem of the household in steady state. So let's go then. And think of a household or a worker, and we'll see that this is a problem to think of households. But
sorry, Victor, can I ask a question?
Thanks.
Yes. All right. So I guess part of the purpose here is to get the flows of workers from one state to the other, including job-to-job flows.
Yes.
And so weights dispersion is the usual way to rationalize this, in particular job-to-job mobility, so large amounts of job-to-job mobility. So here, since you restrict that, well, both in terms of having this 3-point distribution, but also using competitive search as opposed to random search, which I think tends to restrict that channel. Isn't this like you're pushing in two different directions at once, or how should we?
I don't understand the question. So, yes, at some point I would like to have more than 3. Yes, and what we think of it is that if you have a wage dispersion, let's think of the logic like this. When you have some kind of wage dispersion that is centered around the middle, just to fix idea. As the as the good times come, then firms which are making a truckload of money under, say, wage rigidity will flood the market and will be more willing than normally to go to the high wages. Now, workers see that it's more rewarding to go to apply for high wages than normally, and they will have an incentive to quit their jobs or and search for higher wages, or in general, to search for higher wages. And that's the mechanism that we have in mind. So it may be that 3 wages may not be enough, and at some point we're going to look into more, and we'll see that maybe that's the case.
Okay, so that's a cyclical mechanism, I guess. It's not sort of the steady state, the average, but yeah. Okay, I understand.
So in the average, you can just the normal reasons to quit your job. You get pissed off at your boss, you fall in love and you move. You accumulate enough wealth and decide to search again. You're in the mode of searching. So all those things are going to be there normally. Okay. But would be keen on are in seeing how an expansion tilts those incentives in particular ways, and we see whether the resulting change of the flows is consistent with the data. Okay, and does that answer?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. So the steady state is, as I said, it's wealth and wage. That's who you are. And in its simplest form, the problem of a worker is just consume or save, knowing that you may, in this case, there's only 2 options. You may lose your job and go to the group of unemployed, or maintain it and go to and stay employed. And notice that in this simplest version, all the delta is just an exogenous job destruction rate. But the key thing in here is that the wage doesn't change over time because you're in the same job. And you have a standard budget constraint. The problem of an employee is slightly more involved because you have to search, you have to decide what type of job you look. And what type of job, I'm meaning here, this is all workers are identical, is wage relative to market tightness. So in general, it will be easy to find bad low-paying wages or hard to find high-paying wage. And this is a problem that an unemployed worker will have. You will just choose consumption and saving like before, but also which wage where to look at. And one thing that is a highlight here is that theta of W is an equilibrium object. That's what I have. That's in Michał Salari in his Ben's very nice paper, Ben Griffith very nice paper, and also in Gaston and the Sujan Shi's paper. Okay, but the key thing, by the way, this is not always monotonic. Typically, almost always, rich workers will look for higher wages and less easy to find jobs, but that's not always the case. There's some fine properties at extreme edges. That's why Jenny Hout and Sextonary could not prove it, because it's not true that this is a monotonic behavior. Okay, but this is a simple version. Okay, and that's just what I said. Okay.
So you don't have the noise, the noise that you mentioned is not
Yeah,
here.
I'll put it in a second. This is just for starting, just so that you don't get indigestion. You start with soup to move to the steak so it will later. Okay. So, and that generates this is how it goes. You have a certain job, you're working, you lose your job, and then you don't find a job for a while, and once it is well to apply to that job here, and then you move to the right in here, and after a time it comes down. What I want to highlight is that this flat line of wages is drawn for a reason. It's drawn to highlight the very flatness of the wage. So now what Bruno asked for, which is test shifters. This is the modes of the Gamble shock, so which affect obviously the beam. There's search costs, discourage on the job search. There's a cost of quitting to unemployment. There's a test for exiting to outside the labor force. And after saving, think of the period. The best way to think of the period is just to work. You wake up at 8, you're working until noon. This is a lovely place where you only work for 4 hours a day. Then you consume and save. And after lunch, then you draw these shocks that determine your actions. And these are true for employment, for searching and working. Employment means not searching. To be unemployed, I'm searching to be outside the labor force. And you're going to have this outside, this V hat is just expected value as of noon, as of 1 p.m., say after lunch, of this is your value, the expected value function. And then once the shocks are realized, you choose which action to take, which of the 4 options you're going to take. And that will be the maximum over each of the 4 options, plus the idiosyncratic shock that you get. And these ones are shifting shocks that are needed, that we use to calibrate the model. And the nice thing about extreme shocks, not only is that, well, there are many nice things, but not only that the probability depends on the values, on how, so the most likely is the one with the highest value, is that there are closed form solutions that this integral doesn't have to be solved. That by knowing the values of each action, you know the probabilities of each one of them. And it's just this formula. These are logic probabilities that give you a closed form solution. Okay, and we define something I haven't told you yet, what's the value of searching. And that will be, if you are searching, you have to choose which wage and then that's the maximum. Sorry, that's the maximum with the wages, but then you may find a new job or not. But if you're not, you keep the old one because you're on the job search. Okay. And outside the labor force, of course, all they can do is to choose whether to search or not. So they have a slightly different problem. So there is a problem by 3 workers and one problem by outside the labor force workers.
So there's going to be no sense in which workers on the job are passively searching. You're either paying the gumball shot cost and searching, or you're staying out and staying put, right? Is that?
No, you don't pay the gamble cost shot. The gamble cost shot can be positive or negative. What you pay is a non-gamble shot cost. And then if the extreme value shots tend to be realized to be attractive enough, then it's more attractive to search or not.
Gotcha.
Okay, but you don't mean you only do it if it's attractive. So there is these MUS is a discourage to do that. In a way, you can do it like this, or try to think of them being less effective. I don't think in the theory is the same. In the data is not, because you see literally certain measures of market tightness on the job search, then they will have a different meaning. But I don't think those are all that good as far as I can tell. But somebody can correct me. This graph tells a little bit of something useful, which is, imagine instead of a 3-point, we have this wage distribution, this continuous line. This think of that as a density. The 3 lines here, I tell you the quitting probabilities. Okay? So if you are very poor, you're gonna quit low wages with very, very high probability. It's like you're very poor, you cannot afford to be working on an NGO. Okay, you just so you quit. And as the wages go up, you start being attracted by alternatives, and eventually, if the wage is high enough, you just don't quit. If you are quite rich, then you can work for an NGO, but then you are more willing to quit if you don't like the job. So this is a fundamental property of this model. Poverty makes you a slave of your wage in a way, and wealth allows you to cash on your other opportunities in life and to listen to your heart. Okay? And I want you to have in mind that this is a property of how this model works. Okay. And in this model, as far as it is now, your wealth is the only determinant of your initial wage. And that is too strong. And in particular, it closes any ulterior possibility of paying people higher wages to prevent them to quit. Because the only people you will attract if you post higher wages are the rich, who are more prone to quit anyway.
Hey, Victor.
Yep.
Is this quitting just to unemployment, or this includes job-to-job transition?
Oh, of course, this is
Yeah.
job transition in the case, but this graph is more to unemployment. The model includes job-to-job transition. The logic I'm explaining here is into unemployment. Okay. Job-to-job transition may not be monotonic.
That's what I was saying. Okay.
Okay. But yes, I wanted to see wanted to talk about how the wage and the wealth shape and your decision and how it is. So let's call it what we call market timing shocks. And without them, there's perfect correlation between the wealth and the wage and tiny wage dispersion. So with area fluctuations, these specific markets appear and disappear very easily, which makes it a nightmare to even try to solve because it's very hard. So the solution that we have is to add extreme value shocks to the value of each market before agents choose where to go, which means that agents mostly go to the right market, but sometimes land elsewhere. And think of the precision parameter alpha controls how directed the choice is. High alpha means there's no noise, it's just because the alpha is the inverse of the variance of the extreme value shocks. Think of that, what this parameter controls. So very high alpha means there's no noise. And low alpha is just random. When alpha goes to zero, the variance is infinity and the weight doesn't matter. It's just the mode that you care about. The mode, it's only the mode is what controls where you go to. And these shocks affect both sides. So think of them as aiming application shocks. They work as precision with alpha S, and this weaken the wage-wealth correlation when higher. In addition, there are manager posting shocks that control firm's precision. This ensures that vacancies are posted at all wages, even non-profit maximizing ones. So we have always full support for the wage distribution, which, as I said, today it's going to be 3, but in general, there can be much more, many more. Okay. But the utility maximization on the part of workers and manager and profit maximization on the part of firms still works in the sense that there is ex ante decision like free entry or quitting or looking for a job that completely sees the trembling hand associated to the actual choice. So these firm mistakes do not contradict profit maximization. So now workers choose which wage to apply for, and after saving the unemployment draw for each market W prime, and we have this problem. It takes this form where the expected value of an employee just before the realization of those shocks. So remember, at 1 p.m. you choose your actions, at 1:30 you choose where to go to look for these things and solve this problem of maximize choosing the wage of the expected, the probability of finding the job times the value of having that job plus the probability of not finding a job and the value of being unemployed plus the particular realization of this end shock. And again, we have this use a low density of wages conditional on wealth that says you're more likely to go to the market that is best to go, but how accurate is that choice? Again, depends on the noise. Firm managers, the same thing. They choose which market to post in and depends on how different profits are paid in each market controls the probabilities. But again, the highest probability goes to the profit maximizing market. And this is so cleanly written here for an employee. It's the same for on-the-job searches. It's just longer formulas, but that's all there is. So now we have initial the value of a firm with newly hired workers at wage W. This is an important problem. We write it like this. And I can write it as this is the cash flow or the profits, not the cash flow. These are the profits of having a worker times these two objects. And this is just a way of writing simply what is just a present value. So let me go back one stage. With exogenous quits, The problem is block recursive, because nobody needs to know anything about the behavior of the other side. That's not the case here. The case here, the wage that you apply at tells us something about the probability of quitting. Without on-the-job search, the wage is a sufficient statistic for the wealth, and firms can completely compute what is the probability of quitting at each wage. With on-the-job search, that completely breaks down, and firms have to forecast when going to a market, what are the quitting probabilities of the workers. But at the end, we show that this whole set of different quitting probabilities for each wage and tenure. Remember, and it changes by tenure because at each period, you're changing your wealth. Typically, not always, but typically, the longer your tenure, the higher your wealth, the higher the probability of quitting. Everything else equal. But because there is on-the-job search and people are coming, and because there are shocks and people are not always coming from the same wealth, there is no sufficient statistic to figure out the quitting probability. But all you need to know is these two functions that summarize the quitting behavior. And that's what is needed to be solved. As I said, this is not block recursive, and Q0 and Q1 is sufficient. Now, in Shalman and Shee's work, they assume that this is the minutiae of the search details. They assume that the wage contracts are indexed by wealth. Well, that's illegal. And I don't like my agents to do illegal things. So you cannot do that. But in this case, it's irrelevant in a way because of the continuous reshuffling of people. So you still have to compute these two functions. Okay, that adds a layer of complication to things that has to be dealt with in a few ways. Finally, there's a free entry condition that says, well, the cost of entering plus the capital cost of each firm has to be equal to the present value of a firm. And this omega hat, as we I think is wrote before, is the value of a firm before the manager chooses where to post a vacancy. Capitalists are going to be a sideshow just to have all the wealth and ensure that savings respond to interest rates properly. So they're just going to be what capitalists are, in my opinion, just passive consumers, not engines of innovation, as my colleagues think. So in this case, these capitalists have to have a different discount rate to have a well-defined interior steady state with workers. So workers will be slightly more impatient. I think it's more impatient, so that they have, because workers have all these employment changes that are random, and they want to smooth consumption and protect it, and for them to have an endogenous quantity. They can have an endogenous quantity, but given total capital that we aim, deterministic steady state capital is only one beta contingent with them. So they're going to be slightly more patient. Okay, and they just have a serious problem. Yes, I said already, we are thinking of adding a fifth state that is outside the labor force, with the option just to keep track of whether the option to collect unemployment insurance or not is there, but we haven't done that yet. So equilibrium or steady state here is standard. It's a bunch of functions that tell you the value of each state. So value functions of wealth and wages for each state for the firm, and a function of market tightness of the wage and the profits associated with each state. They also include a stationary distribution jointly over wages and wealth. And the conditions are the ones that we always talk about. Agents do their thing, which includes free entry for all posted markets, asset markets clear, and labor market flows are consistent and stationary. And then for outside steady state, well, just with solve endogenous grid, you can do that. But outside steady state, we work very hard to solve this problem. And just for those of you that are interested, we try the sequence-based Jacobian, and we still try and work that, but it turns out that the subtleties of constructing the differentials are quite hard and difficult to implement. And what pair with Timo Boppert and Kurt Binman do is in a way simpler to implement and not a lot harder in the computer, at least. Finally, another thing that matters about dynamics is that we tend to think that a couple of hundred periods is enough. Turns out that for this high frequency economy, you need to put more periods. So there are two issues when you put many periods in a model. One is that the wealth to income ratio becomes much, much larger, and you need to solve for a larger range. That's not so important here because our workers are poor bastards, and I want to keep them relatively poor to have any sensible thing. I don't think blue-collar workers, this is a model of essentially of the average worker owns anything close to the average wealth. But the transitions take a long time. Yeah, so that's a cost to endure. Okay. So if there's no question, I'm going to talk about some of the steady-state properties. And from now on, I'm going to be in much more shady territory. Okay. So I really want to know what you have to say. So let's think of how to map this model to a steady state. And we think of the three groups of parameters or even better of properties. The standard ones, which is risk aversion, patience, capital depreciation, interest rates, processes that are going to govern productivity or whatever else. By the way, I'll try to make this my last paper with a TFP shock. But this one will happen. Okay, and those ones are standard. We know how to do that, and those are pinned by the standard targets: wealth to output, investment to output, interest rate, that type of thing. Then we have something about search and matching. Well, that includes some of the properties of the matching functions, and we want to get them by getting right the job finding rates, vacancy cost postings. Then we have the tail shifters that we want to make to be pinned by the gross float rates, and this is a little bit of the novel part. And why flows matter is that in order to get the marginal flows that come with an expansion or recession as a response of what we think should only be prices and opportunities to find jobs, we want to get the normal flows from the minutia of life, from the turnover of why people just change. I want to get those rights and see what's the contribution of the two things that we're modeling in. The wage, the opportunities the higher productivity translates into perhaps higher opportunities to find jobs and higher wages, and we want to see how much can they shift people's behavior. So we want the data flows to just to discipline all that we are doing here. But then we have four economies, and this is something that we're still working on. And what we want to do, these four economies are going to differ in the noise of these aiming shocks that we have. How much of wage dispersion can be traced to manager incompetence or the firms not knowing very well how much to pay, or working sometimes paying sometimes more, sometimes less, or in the difficulties or on the worker side, workers do not know what exactly type of market they are in, and having the right match. And so we're going to explore different sources of noise and voice expression. Is it firms making a mistake? Is it workers making that mistake? Is it both? How big of that is there? But we're going to try to get these economists to target all the flows that are calibrating things will change. And to get an idea of what we're trying to target, and tell me if we are right. So we're targeting something in this discussion. Think of the population being 90%, so these numbers are not very transparent. These numbers are targeting something like an 84% employment rate, and an employment rate of 6-7%, and outside the labor force of around 8 or 9%. And these are non-retired households. These are households that would consider unretiring themselves. So this is the targets that we have in mind. And here's one of the first shortcomings of this project. So the first shortcoming, I would say, that households are one-worker families. And as such, they do not have a lot of margin to add bodies to the workforce. And that might result in too few mobility, too little responsiveness of houses. So at some point, I think we have to add multiple bodies to the household. Okay, so those are the targets that we have in terms of stocks, and then labor share and a low interest rate. The flow targets monthly, what we want to have is job finding rates, which we still have to improve, but the idea is to match job finding rates, quits, job to job switches, outside the labor force returning, that type of thing. And so those are all the targets that we want to have. But these involve essentially solving a gigantic function of 10 to the gigantic. I mean, to solve 10, 15 parameters and 10, 15 unknowns, where those are the targets that you have, and you solve for the steady state of this thing, which is relatively costly.
Can I ask you, like, now, I'm not a labor economist, but like, what exactly the search is buying you? So, and the way I'm thinking here is that, so usually you get the distribution of weights, as you point out by with the search, but I almost feel like you, given the shocks you have, you are basically using the 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 search parameter just to get the average. And I almost wonder if like you could get everything without having a search model.
Uh,
Um,
so how would you get wage dispersion without search?
well, you could do the same thing, but you could exogenously put the distribution, right? So you could, like the same way that have a shock, a distribution, right? So you think in your model, if that shock, the dispersion of the shock goes to infinity, right? Like I think you get the exactly uniform distribution over your choice.
Then
Is that
what do I?
correct?
Well, if you put that, yes, but then how could you learn something about what do the cycle do to incentives to change jobs or to change your status in the labor market? You have to be moved by
So,
something.
so my question is a little bit quantitative, right? It's almost like saying like you once you're targeting this, can you actually get anything out of the search? So is
I don't know, and let me see if I don't think I understand the question for the following reason. If remember what we want to know. We want to know in an expansion and a recession, your incentives to work, not to work, have changed. And they have changed because the set of wages out there maybe is different. New jobs seems to pay a little bit more. Old jobs may or may not pay more. We want to know about that. And we want to know. And then there's also different odds of finding a job that they have changed. And we want to know how to get both those changes to happen and those changes to affect people's behavior. And I do not know how to do it without search. If the noise were infinity, then workers would have absolutely no say over the wages. It would be completely irrelevant.
well, you still care for the average wage, so your decision would be based on the what on the. So I'm saying like firms look at the average wage, and then they
But
decide whether to enter based on the average wage.
I thought
Workers decide whether to look for a job based on the average wage, but you don't need the distribution generated by the competitive search.
I
Right,
thought
that's what I'm saying. Is like that's distribution generated by the competitive search seems to me that's gonna be totally not quantitatively important because it will be dominated by all these other shocks that are decided. So it would be like we just care for the average.
well,
This is more of a quantitative question. Like but just something to think about because there are so many other shocks in this model that
that's for us to find out. All I'm
okay.
saying is, even though this model has its aiming shock, the actual expansion is capable of changing what is out there. And therefore, the existence of those shocks is not enough to not be responding to those changes out there. And what we want to do is to see how much more do people change. Remember the number that I told you, job to jobs are 4 times more volatile in expansions. Okay, one possibility is that the wages are higher on the new jobs and not on the ones you have. So if the wages are rigid, then your current job will not change. So lots of things in macro depend on the notion of how much profits and wages absorb an expansion. And what we want to get is some further insight into that from the behavior. And I don't think an average wage will do. Okay, this noise is not eliminating the fundamentals, it's just creating a space for the normal turnover. Okay.
Thanks.
I mean, I don't know if that answered, but
Yeah, no, I think it's more of a quantitative question, but yeah, I understand I understand where the intuitions come from.
quantitative questions, well, once we get a solid quantitative answer, we can settle this thing. But in principle, I wanted to get that. Yep. So we were, and we have.
I have a question too.
Yep.
So I have a question on the distribution of assets and
Yep.
and also on labor mobility, because you have that so for some region, so regional agents are more likely to quit the job. And I wonder if this is how this is going to affect your stationary distribution. So if you're going to have, for example, that people that are richer, so they're going to be longer unemployed. I don't know. So I was thinking about this kind of
Yes,
prediction.
there is.
Hmm.
Remember, this model is a model, not a model of wealth accumulation. For me, it's not a model of who gets rich. This is a model of average Joes who do not have a chance of earning anything more. So this is not to understand the wealth distribution. Okay, so think of this as a model of with one class of households. You can think of them as blue collars or even low-level white collars that consist the majority of the workers here. Now, within those classes, having extra wealth will make you be pickier about the job. Whether we have enough evidence of that is not 100% settled, but this is relatively narrow to look into that. If you look, most data that will look at that issue, I think will mix high wage people and they also have high wealth and compare them with lower wage people. That's not what we want to do here. So we think, that the urgency of the wealth matters. Now that said, nobody got rich with a blue collar job, as I said with my all left wing yearnings. This is not these guys. We want them to have about half a yearly wealth of income as their worth. So there's not going to be a lot of wealth that they can hold to stay large numbers of people and employees. Okay, that's why the whole point of having capitalists on the side that own 80% of the wealth is to have a lot of wealth in the economy, to have investment being important, but to have not a small open economy that lives on its own. So to have the responses of the interest rate mattering in the expansion, but not have these workers so rich that nothing really matters to them because they have the average wealth of the economy, which is 40 times quarterly consumption. They have so much, nothing matters to them. Like here, they want to be much poorer. So in a sense,
Okay.
okay, I don't know if that answers, but that's why we did it like this. So,
can I ask a quick question?
yeah.
So what if if you allow search effort and so the search effort varies with wealth, will it change the match on U2E?
Well, if you let search effort, one way to think of it, there is search effort through the back door here, but we give it names. You put search effort when you do search, and you don't put search effort when you are outside the labor force or employed without search. So that search effort is there. It's not in a continuously differentiable first order condition kind of way. Okay, but it's there. Like people will search more when it's more important to them. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
You can also just sorry for everybody. You can also interpret the matching probability as a form of searching effort, right? So you can pick a lower wage, which means a higher matching probability. So the cost is not coming through a exogenous cost of effort, but it comes in a lower wage, right? So given the
Yes. No. The logic is the same, but we use the words differently. Okay, so your desperation translates into putting out with a shitty job. Indeed, but we don't call that search effort. The search effort is translating into before you get the job. And when you're really like that, you're more likely to go then maximizing the probability of finding, when they're really poor, maximizing the probability of finding a job is relatively more important than the actual wage. So you're going to be looking for, as you said, for low wage, rather than richer guys who will be looking for higher wages, and therefore, as Andres said, there will be longer unemployment on average.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is not so important. This is for economists, and we have this baseline that has this particular combination. The units, the numbers are different because the units are different. One is UTs and one is dollars, so you cannot compare the absolute value of these. These are the variances of the shocks measured in units of the objective function. Okay, so they are different, but what I want to do, this is economy-directed benchmark, has that the worker is more precise and the firm has more noise. Sorry, the opposite. I always get confused, but we're going to concentrate on the baseline, which is this one. Okay. And so yes, so let me ignore this for a second. So what it said is the summary is small letters here. The plummet transmits shocks into gross flows are going to be different depending on how firm concentration will go. Okay, so this is about the nature of the wage dispersion, and because we don't know enough about how the model works yet, I want to leave this for later, but that's the mechanics of wage dispersion are at the core of what's behind. So the steady state here has endogenous wage dispersion with these three markets, and firms where workers and firms sort imperfectly. There's efficiency wages, higher wage workers quit less, firms value that. Okay, so that is something that matters. So it's a notion of efficiency wages, not so much they are more productive, but they are less costly because they have less quits. The correlation between wealth and wage is weaker because of this noise. And self-insurance matters as the gap between value of working and not working shrinks with wealth, and that matters. And then most of the wealth the capitalists have. Now what we want to do is put a TFP shock and see a little bit of what happens. And at the end, what we really want to do is shed some light on the nature of this VZ. Is this going to change the wages or not? Are the wages fixed? So think of that. This is VZ times Z plus 1, the parenthesis missing, but the idea is VZ of 0, wages are rigid, and expansion comes, all the wins comes from the workers, all the ways go to capital, and because it's dividends and all dividends are on the hands of the capitalists, all the wealth of workers is in the form of bonds that do not have this windfall, then there's an incentive of workers to change jobs. There's an incentive of firms to move towards high-paying jobs. Is that going to be an important deal? The larger VZ is, the less important is that. Wages are there's going to be more entry because profits are higher. There's going to be more wages at the high, more vacancies posted at the high end, and the incentives to move towards the high end are smaller than before because even the low end are also moving up. Okay. So this is the whole thing that we want to learn about. And we're going to solve this, as I said, using the PKM thing. Okay. So let's see what happens in here. Things move quite slowly. This is 10 years. That's why we need a 1,000 period. And Apple, this is a TFP shot that goes up by 1%, and it's quite persistent. Okay. By 10 years later, it's still 10%. But look at employment. Two things about employment. The first one, this tells you about the failure of this model, which might be this a close casting of the Shannon puzzle in a way, which is employment builds very, very slowly, and it moves quite little. In the data, this would move something like 0.7%. That will be the response and will be much faster. So if he is monotonic and it takes 8 years or so to achieve the peak, and that's because of the nature of two things. There is the way we model this, and maybe I wasn't explicit, and that's one of the things we're learning. We have to change the notion of a job. A job here is a machine attached to a worker, and the machine has hardwired the wage, and there is no more manager, so the wage cannot be changed, except mechanically through that fee that I was talking about. But because jobs need to be created, investment has to be preceded the job creation. Investment takes time and is expensive. Finding a job takes time through the matching function. So it takes a long time for employment to respond. So the first message of this paper may be orthogonal to everything else I've said, but we have to think of a different way of sharing capital, of sharing investment. This one job, one machine will not do it. The same way unemployment accordingly moves quite slowly, and investment peaks, and consumption of workers, where consumption of workers is a majority, so overall workers' consumption is much less volatile than investment, so the bottom properties are fine. This model is consistent with all the models of business cycles where consumption and investment are both procyclical and consumption is less volatile. But the flows are not responsive enough. And what happens to the interesting things in here? Well, first thing is E to U false. In a way, it's the wrong time. E to U is falling, which is it's the wrong time to be quitting into unemployment. Remember, there's some job distraction that we're keeping constant because that's not affected by them. The third job distraction is constant. The E to outside labor flow seems to have the wrong sign. Total separations fall. The U to E goes up temporarily, but not for very long, and then it comes down. And the reason is that people accumulate wealth and they stop finding jobs that fast. But the key success is now the market gets flooded by workers. This is outside the labor force enters the market. It's a lot easier to find a job. It's more attractive. The wages are slightly higher. And also the job-to-job transition is procyclical. It moves 2%. So this is, Bruno, this is one of the things you cannot get with average wages. You know, they're going to tell us about the nature of an expansion here. Job-to-job transitions are moving up. Why is that? For two reasons. There are two reasons to change a job. One of them is you may make more money somewhere else. The other one, you cannot stand your boss. Now, if your boss is in the gray area and jobs are scarce, then you put up with her. But if jobs are plentiful, you're more willing to switch to search, and it's going to be more of that now because it's a lot easier to look for a job and find them. So the E to U falls in the quiz to you are smaller in booms. Now the job search becomes more attractive. And we have some of the growth flows, and this is something I may be saying something that doesn't make sense in this particular, because I haven't digested everything, but you can see how the model has something to say about this. But in particular, I want to highlight that these two are the successes. It's workers suck into employment because of it's more attractive to do so. So yes, this is what I just said. It booms.
Victor, just my apologies, I kind of messed it up this, but you're right, like 10 minutes over.
Oh, so sorry. So let me finish.
Yeah, if you want to take another 5 minutes, but you're
No,
taking from
I'll take
the
2 or 3.
Q&A, just
Okay,
so you
sorry.
know.
Thanks, Bruno.
No,
Thanks
that's my
for
fault. I should have let you know in advance. This is we're all paying attention.
I'll take it as a compliment, Bruno. Man. Okay. So let me summarize to in here. This model has the potential of telling us, so let me almost conclude in here. This model has the potential to get some answers about how big are the wage rigidity by getting things like this type of flows, right? And the flow and the race that I put at the very beginning of the presentation, which is the HP moments of the gross flows with the data. We're going to get them right. And what we're going to do is, in a way, estimate the degree of wage rigidity and what's the degree and what's the rationale for the wage dispersion that we have. It comes from the firm side, comes from the worker side, to tell us what does it have to be to generate the observations that we have. But one of the things that we have to solve first before we get that is the cousin of the Sharman puzzle, the one that I said before. We need to get more employment creation. That means that the vacancies have to be a lot easier to create and to not require all the investment that we had before. So that's it. I think I better stay here. I don't like to overextend my.
Yeah, thank you, Victor. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We can still take 15 minutes if everybody's available to ask questions. But I will just kind of say thank you now, and then if you have to go, please go ahead. And appreciate Victor again for the talk.
The joy is mine. Thanks very much, Bruno, for inviting me. Any question? I'm here for a while.
I had a few comments. So there's a couple things that I think are affecting your quantitative results that might be why you're getting these slow dynamics in some of the puzzles that you're talking about. So one is you said it was quarterly or solved quarterly, but you're using these monthly flows, and that's implying durations of non-employment that are way longer than in the data.
No, Amanda, wait.
Yeah.
Wait. I'm getting a little bit. This is a half a quarter model, and we report the numbers properly.
Oh, half a quarter. No, still.
So
okay,
it's not going to get a really one-to-one mapping when I move it to monthly, but that's not the core of the issue. The core of the issue is the core of the slowness. It's not so much that is 6 weeks rather than monthly or weekly. It's more the fact that you can only hire from A once you have the machine, which you have to buy, and that takes away from consumption, and not that many can be massively showing up at the same time. So vacancy have to be slowly posted. The second one, which may be what you had in mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the matching function is a strange structure when you so I said the matching function may be a
Do you want me to tell you what I
put
had in
additional
mind?
constraints. No, put additional constraints that we're not very happy with. Yes, go ahead, Amanda.
Yeah, so the other thing is these job-to-job flows, like a third of them are layoffs. And I was wondering if that could be useful for you to be able to separate how hard it is to find a job quickly versus the taste to want to move.
You mean job to job, a third of them are layoffs?
I mean, a third of people who say that they are, had a job with one employer last week, moved to a job with a new employer this week, said that they were laid off.
Okay. So the job to job transition, and I tell you at face value, the job to job transition is extremely procyclical. Any measure of layoff that we have is counter-cyclical. So what it's taking you and the volatility is 4 times that of output. So what they take you to mean is that the true job-to-job transitions, if I were to separate the job-to-job transitions into pure job-to-job and go through a brief unemployment stage, which are the ones I should say, will even be a lot more volatile than what they are now. And going from 4 to, say, 6 or 8, as your calculations seem to indicate, will be something we can look into. But it's not going to change the big picture of the issue, which is that they're extremely procyclical.
Sure, I thought it might be useful for you in another sense because the pure job to job quits are something to do with your current state and your current job and your preferences to move to another one or whatever shocks are hitting you. But the layoffs are more to do with how hard it is to find another job, more to do with the technology than your current state.
Layoffs have to do with how far it is to find another job. Layoffs have to do with having lost the current job.
I know, but but many of these laid off workers, like a quarter of them, are able to move very quickly to another job.
Yes, which speaks more about the nature of the matching function.
Yes. Yeah, great.
That we have to explore more in detail about what's a good way of thinking of it than maybe the one we have here, which I said nothing that is pretty standard, which may not be the right way to think of it. But that's in line. That's down the road to explore it more. As I said, the job to job is robust to your comment, and it's even more conditional on your comment.
Any other questions?
So can you just a little, so for the E2 out of labor force, why it I kind of lost it. Why it increases in the rooms if employment become.
Why do you say that?
So when employment become more attractive and searching become, I mean, it makes me think. So why people leave out of labor force? Yeah.
It's consistent with Hackfeld and Graves and Swanson findings. They find a search, if anything, search is more is countercyclical. Like you really find it's workers are really moved by the ability to find jobs. So you have jobs of utility by taking your time, 3 months out. Okay, let's say that you want to go and have something, some particular opportunity to do something else over a period. You can afford to quit your job now and take it easy and not search, because you can more safely come back in. Both the probabilities of finding a job and the wages are there waiting for you. So while those things, if nobody has a job, it's just giving it up. The one you have is playing with fire. I think that would be the logic, okay? And what we want to do, we have to analyze this a lot more in detail, the extent to which this is actually happening, and by dealing with the data. So that's some of the things we haven't really digested properly and got all those findings yet, but that's something that recent empirical work have found, and the very nice paper I just quoted, and we want to see how much of it is there.
Thank you.
So I don't know if you have thought about this, but I know that there are different papers looking at this business cycle and the value of assets. I know there are some literature in, like, if you have say a house price boom and a recession, that looks very different if it's not. And given that the value of the assets for these workers, like in practice, is for a lot of them is like housing price. Have you tried to look at how this correlation looks, depend on how the housing price is moving, or other measures of like asset pricing movements? Because you might like you have this clear channel with the asset price. So if you're looking, say, during COVID and house prices just goes up, may looks very different than, say, 2009 when house price like not collapsed but went down, and you might look conditional correlations.
In a way, this is a paper that is boringly before 2008 thinking. What 2008 thinking is that recession has changed shape, and the role of housing became, in my opinion at least, became more prominent on the 2008 recession. But there, it works differently than the way you said it in my book. The way I think it works is that think of the economy consisting of 3 types of people. The poor people have no house, no hopes of housing. Then there is a chunk of people that have a house and a mortgage, and then the rest who own all the wealth and the mortgages and some house. So the bottom, nothing changed for them. That's about a third or 30% of the population, not much change for them, were unaffected. The bottom, however, the middle, however, got poorer. And you may see, because they got poorer, they kept the mortgage. That didn't change, but their house lost value. So those guys may have felt the heat of being poorer and may have cut consumption and have cut a little bit of their working attitude as a result. Then there's the rich guys that really didn't matter much to them one way or the other. So that was a particular sharp property of 2009, 2010, that there were a bunch of people in between just the 30 and the 85 percentile of wealth who lost the shirt and had negative wealth effect. And there may have been an additional willingness to work on their part, that the slow recovery did not pick up. So in a way, maybe the recession was even worse because there was this army of additional workers that were not hired. So if that's what you're saying, at some point we should look into that. But this is more paper on the standard born in recessions, not that one.
Thank you.
I don't know if that answers Ben.
Yeah, thank you. Do you have any other questions? Comments?
Well, I hope, let me say one more thing. I hope that these image shocks, this is what they call the little curiosity about search theory. It's something you can pick it up if you want to reduce the brutal correlation that the standard dynamic programming problems put in choices. That the models becomes too strongly predict too strongly the behavior between the relation between variables in the cross section, and this is a way to weaken them, maintaining a positive but weaker. That can be very useful in many contexts. That's all. That's the conversion.
Thank you, Victor, and thank for all our panelists for coming and staying to 50 minutes additional time. I really appreciate the talk. I appreciate the time for everyone, and see you on April 13th.
Okay. Thanks very
Take
much.
care.
I'm very happy. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye. Thank you.